up, champs, and welcome to another episode of the Keeping Karlsson Short Shifts podcast. My name is Ben Burnett. I am your host. Joining me, as always, Louis Ezekiel, and the E is for ecstatic about Dominik Kubalik. Am I right?
Oh, yeah. I'm absolutely loving it. And, as long as we're talking about our waiver wire super friends that we're enjoying, how about your boy Blake Coleman going off for a Hattie on Tuesday night?
Yeah, it's a good night to be a Coleman and Kubalik owner.
Coleman is doing Coleman things. He is basically carrying the offense for New Jersey. No, they weren't able to win, but obviously he had an excellent night for himself. And then about halfway through this Chicago-Ottawa game with Chicago down 2-0, Coach reunited the Taves, Kane, Kubalik line, and they made some magic. Kubalik with 2 goals and Taves with the overtime winner. That game just wrapped as we are recording here on Tuesday night. Fantastic stuff.
Yeah, I think the exciting thing there is just knowing that Kubalik is back playing with Jonathan Taves and Patrick Kane, despite the disappointment that we had when we saw that those lines had been shifted up in the last practice.
It seems like Chicago's coach recognized pretty quick that if he wanted to get back into this game, he needed to put that line back together and let them work their magic, and they were rewarded with a win in overtime.
Yeah, I think as long as that Kane, Taves, and Kubalik line is together, they're Kubalik is a must-own.
Yeah, I think so. And, he's starting to get picked up in more and more leagues. I was able to get him last week for nothing. I imagine that tomorrow, if you're in a league that requires free agent auction bidding, it might cost you a few dollars to be able to pick him up. So get on that waiver wire and check him out if he's still available.
Absolutely. Let's get right into another guy who's a must-own, although he's not someone who's going to be available on your waiver wire. He may be in your IR spot, and I hope you didn't leave him in tonight. Sidney Crosby is back for the Pittsburgh Penguins finally after nearly 30 games on the bench.
Yeah, so Crosby made his return on Tuesday night after missing 28 games for a core muscle surgery. Sounds pretty unpleasant. He came right back and centered Dominik Simon and Jared McCann at even strength and returned to his usual spot on the first power play. There was some speculation that Bryan Rask might not hold his top power play spot, but he was able to keep it to the first power play unit. Looked like Rust, Crosby, Hornqvist, Malkin, and Letang. They obviously had a hugely successful night with a 7-3 victory. And Crosby was outstanding. A goal and 3 assists. He's on my opponent's team this week. I can't even be mad. Happy to see Crosby back in action. This is great news for the top 6 in Pittsburgh. They get an improved center or better matchup opportunities. Great for Jarry and Murray to a lesser extent, who are going to get better puck control and more goals. And it's a chance for Evgeny Malkin to kind of maybe relax from his Hercules act, although he was very active during the game tonight. But we've seen over the past several seasons, whenever Crosby is out, Malkin usually goes ham, and ham he went. We'll see if he cools off a little bit here, but you got to think that having Crosby back in that top 6, other than sort of the psychological impact, it's got to be mostly good for him.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I kind of want to call that Malkin Russ line 1 while Dominik Kahun remains on that line. Interestingly, I think for those who streamed him in towards the end of last week, the McCann Crosby Simone line is okay. I'm cool with rostering Jared McCann on Crosby's wing. Definitely a little disappointed as a Patrick Hornqvist owner to see him all the way down on line 3 with Galchenyuk and Agazino.
But nice at least that he was able to keep that top power play spot.
Yeah, for sure. He did register an assist in tonight's game after scoring a power play goal in the previous game. He's on one of those patented Patrick Hornqvist hot streaks right now. It's tough to complain as a Hornqvist owner, but you'd like to see him on Crosby's wing instead of playing with a couple of guys who are struggling to do anything at all at even strength.
Absolutely. That was not our only big outjury this evening here on Tuesday. Jonathan Marchessault returned to the lineup for Vegas. Not the return that Crosby experienced. Vegas fell to the Sabres 4-2. But Marchessault was out for 5 games with this mysterious lower body ailment. The Vegas offense has not been especially effective now in the last 4 games, with 3 goals being their best output there. Hopefully Marchessault moving forward can give them a little bit more of a spark. Like with Crosby, Marchessault's return is going to be a boon to the top 6. It does push Alex Tuch back down to the 3rd line. Last time Tuch made his way into the top 6, he was a must-own off the waiver wire with his offensive production. Not so much this time around. He was not able to be the offensive juggernaut he was earlier in the year, so he remains a bit of an enigma. With the top wings in Vegas pretty well set, he needs to take all the advantage he can of any opportunity to become fantasy relevant. I definitely had my eye on him when Marchessault went down, but I was a little more patient and didn't end up grabbing him for some of his slow performances.
Yeah, I think it's obviously a bummer for Tuch, though. In Vegas, where you have a 3rd-line center as talented as Paul Stastny, I think you could do a lot worse. But yeah, for now, I think that Vegas is kind of back to that spot that they were earlier in the year, where it's not really a lot of streaming options there. The top 6 is very, very settled in. Chandler Stevenson remains an interesting ad right now while he's playing between Pacioretty and Mark Stone, but overall not a ton changes over in Vegas, as opposed to, I think, maybe in Pittsburgh, where, Sidney Crosby's return is changing the orbit of the metropolitan Pittsburgh area.
Yeah, just kind of a return to the status quo in Vegas.
Coming down off the outjury section, we have to get into a couple of sadder injuries. First of all, I think this is the big one. Morgan Rielly was announced today will miss the next 8 weeks at a minimum with a fractured foot. I am assuming that this injury is just to cover up as some sort of witness protection type program after Connor McDavid ruined his life last week. A year ago, this would have been massive news in Toronto, and who would have taken power play 1? But Tyson Barrie is pretty much neutered Rielly's value on his own by stealing those minutes. The move did lead to Rasmus Sandin getting the call-up for the Leafs. He looked great in his first game back with the big club. Sandin scored 2 assists in third-pair minutes. He also skated with the second unit on the power play, which is an interesting development. Lewis, are we into Rasmus Sandin for the next couple months?
I think Sandin is worth keeping an eye on as we see how his deployment looks the next couple of weeks. I'm not super into him as a rush to grab to pick up. I think he is more interesting for the Toronto fans who have waited to kind of see him in action a little bit more than your average fantasy GM.
Yeah, I mean, playing fewer than 17 minutes tonight, not a great look, but definitely I think that there is value in being on the Leafs. He's going to have some big games. I also wouldn't be shocked to see him lose that power play deployment when Jake Muzzin returns from his injury, hopefully not too far down the line here.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
We have a couple of goalie injuries as well. We'll start in Philadelphia, where Carter Hart left practice on Tuesday. Coach Vigneault said he felt something in his lower body during practice. Hart had played the entirety of Philly's come-from-behind shootout victory over the Bruins. This was, of course, the rare shootout game that will almost certainly be remembered by many after the whiff heard round the world by Brad Marchand. Alex Lyon called up, and an update is expected on Hart Wednesday. Lewis, what is your confidence level that Brian Elliott could be a useful starter if Hart were to miss a ton of games?
Last week, I called Carter Hart an average goalie on an average team. I think Brian Elliott at this point of his career might be a slightly below average goalie on an average team. That being said, if Hart is out for any significant period of time, I do think he might make an interesting ad. But I would say the interesting ads on the waiver wire at this time in the season seem to abound. So, Brian Elliott compared to your Aaron Dells, your Elvis Merzlikins, who shut out Boston today with 34 saves. If there are any of those options still out there and available for you, I'd rather have them before Brian Elliott.
I agree with you on Merzlikins. Aaron Dell, though. Are we really buying into Aaron Dell, actually being good?
He's been quite good over his last half dozen starts here. Looks like they're tied up right now. I know it's hard to believe because the beginning of the season was so horrible for him, but it does seem like the coaching switch has changed things a little bit. I'm not saying that I believe that he's going to be a great starter for the rest of the year, but at least for the time being, he is putting up good fantasy numbers, and I think you're missing out if he's sitting around on your waiver wire, while in the meantime, some of these more supposedly reliable goalies are doing pretty poorly.
Yeah, it's fair enough. I mean, it's been about 15 games of pretty solid numbers from Aaron Dell, so I should give it up to him that at least he's on a heater right now. He's definitely worth more to me than Bryan Elliott would be. But yeah, if you're desperate for a starter, I'm not above grabbing Bryan Elliott in a pinch.
Yeah, I think that's the way to look at him, is if you need somebody, now you've got an opportunity. But there may be another waiver wire option who could be of interest to you, who also played in that game against Carter Hart. I know this will be tough for you to talk about.
Yes. So Lewis, you've transitioned right into the injury that is very difficult for me, as I own Tuukka Rask in the Cupful, the Keeping Karlsson Ultimate Patron Fantasy League. Scary sight in Columbus tonight. Rask started the game but left only minutes in after taking a pretty gratuitous blow from Emil Bergstrom. Since the game ended, Coach Cassidy has said that it was a concussion that Rask has suffered, which kind of scary for him. He's suffered at least 2 concussions since the beginning of the 2018 season, from what I could dig up in my research for this show. Coincidentally suffered one almost exactly a year ago after a collision in the crease following a Philly Heat goal. In the meantime, as long as Rask is out, Jaroslav Halak, tier 1 goalie?
I mean, it's tough because if you are just thinking about his performance this season and last kind of broadly, then yeah, it definitely seems that way. But he has had some shaky games as of late. It seems like not a great time for him to kind of be taking over the starting position, just because, they had that comeback game on Monday night against Halak, and obviously he was defeated today. Even 1 goal would have been enough, obviously, with the way Merzlikins was playing, but he got beat for 3 today. Obviously coming in cold, playing most of the back-to-back. I think we can maybe excuse him, but a few concerning warning signs. Overall, though, I do think Halak makes a very appealing ad, certainly more than Bryan Elliott. This has been one of the stronger goalie tandems in the league the last couple years. And, the amount of rest that he's gotten, he should be quite fresh and ready to go here, taking on those number 1 duties for the time being. Boston, obviously a great team. They're going to win much more games than they lose. So if wins count a lot in your league, I would be running to the waiver wire to pick up Jaro Halak.
Yeah, I'm very into Jaro Halak. My thinking is that Halak will be much less available than Bryan Elliott, and as I look at these ownership rates, it is 55% owned for Jaro Halak, only 7% for Bryan Elliott. So if you are in a shallow league, go out and get Jaro Halak now. I have obviously been enjoying the fact that he's struggled recently. As the Rask owner, I was thinking that this may lead to more Rask starts for me. Unfortunately, the concussion means that he's almost certainly going to miss a few weeks of time here, hopefully not too much. And I think that Halak will have a chance to work out some of the kinks in his game. So I'm not afraid to add Jaro Halak, sitting at a 920 on the season and slated to get, every game that Boston plays until Rask returns. As I mentioned, he did suffer an injury he suffered a concussion on January 19th, 2019. And returned just after the All-Star break. He said that the 10-day absence for the Bruins, which included their bye week, was perfect timing for him. Hopefully it's a similar thing here and he doesn't suffer any sort of after effects of this concussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, we wish him all the best. He's been a really excellent goalie when he's been in for the most part over the last couple seasons. All right, so Ben, I'm going to throw a handful of potential goalie ads at you, and I'm curious how you might rank them. Halak, Dell, Elliott, Merzlikins, and how about Talbot available out there? How would you rank those goalies from most appealing to least?
Well, I think Halak is clearly the number 1 option here. No short-term competition and on an elite team. Merzlikins has shown he deserves a little bit of credit here, and he's going to get some run. Korpisalo's injury taking place with the All-Star break coming up means that he'll get he'll probably play a few games fewer than you would like from a fill-in, but I think that he may be the number 2 just because I think that he holds on to the spot the longest of the remaining 4 goaltenders. For me, then, it's between Talbot and Dell. As I mentioned before, I'm just kind of skeptical about Aaron Dell, although he probably has less competition than Dave Riddick offers in Calgary. So maybe they're kind of a split field for me at this point, given that I trust Calgary to be a better team and therefore give Talbot more opportunities to win, whereas I don't see Martin Jones mounting an offensive and making a play for Dell's starts. I'm just kind of skeptical of his ability to maintain his current pace. But I have to give it up to him. The last 15 games have been so solid that, yeah, I'll lean Dell over Talbot, and then in fifth place, Bryan Elliott. As you say, a below average goalie on an average team.
All right. Sounds pretty good. That's some solid fantasy advice for our listeners there. I know goalie season, especially towards the middle of the year, it gets pretty wild as we start to see, those risers establish themselves. Some of the traditional good goalies, maybe the luster has worn off them a little bit.
Lewis, we're heading into our final segment tonight, and I'm going to hand the keys over to you. You've got a couple of takes for me, and I am going to rate those takes.
All right, so the idea here that you brought up for us initially and that we're going to try to pursue is we want to talk about who some players this year remind us of from previous seasons. So, so-and-so is this year's, player X. So I tried to find some allegories here that I thought were effective. I'm interested to see what you think. I dove into the stats on some of them a little bit here. So let me know how you feel about these options as you rate these takes. My first take here is that Mikko Rantanen is this year's 2016-17 TJ Oshie. The idea here is that they are both on crazy shooting percent benders, but I think that they're the type of player who can keep those shooting rates up throughout the course of their whole season. And even though they may not reach these heights again in the future, could provide their owners with a really nice fantasy season here, as you might expect, obviously, from Mikko Rantanen, a truly elite player. So I looked at Oshie's 2016-17 season. He played 68 games. Mikko has played 29 games so far this season. So far, they have shot Oshie shot 23.8% on 143 shots. Mikko so far has a 21.13% shooting percentage on 71 shots. Their individual expected goals versus their actual goals throughout the course of the season. And keep in mind, Oshie played over twice as many games as Mikko, so that'll account for some of the differences here. Oshie had an individual expected goals of 18.83 and ended up scoring 33 goals. Mikko right now has a 7.4 individual expected goals, but has scored 15. So in both cases, in the vicinity of twice as many goals scored as goals expected. Oshie paced for 110 individual high danger chances for over the course of his, if he had played 82 games that season. Rantanen's a little lower on that individual high danger chances pace. He's looking at 1 a game. And then where Mikko really stands alone here is his power play shooting percent. He is at 28.57% shooting on the power play, whereas Oshie was only, and I say only with my air quotes here, at 18.92 during that magical shooting season. He actually shot worse on the power play than he did at even strength, which is pretty wild. So how do you feel about Mikko Rantanen being cast as this year's 16-17 TJ Oshie?
Well, I mean, my first thought is, how are these two? I mean, that would be terrible if Mikko Rantanen was the 2016-17 TJ Oshie, because he'd be on pace for 55 points, right? I've got to assume we're throwing assists out.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking about in terms of finding someone, I went through this looking for someone who was on just kind of a wild shooting pace to make some comparisons for. So, yeah, I think we're talking about in terms of, shooting conversion here.
Okay. Well, if that's the case, I will say 18% on the power play for TJ Oshie. That's not a bad mark. Some people who play that spot on the power play are definitely able to carry an 18 to 20%. I'm thinking of that that slot spot on the power play. A lot of goals are scored from there. Mark Scheifele makes a ton of hay from that spot. So definitely I think that makes sense that he was about 18% on the power play. Obviously the even strength shooting percentage is wild. Mikko Rantanen, I see he's on pace right now for about a 40-goal season if he played the full year, which would definitely be on the high side. Overall, yeah, I mean, I'm seeing a 4% jump in his shooting percentage year over year. If he were to be shooting 16% as he did the previous 2 years so far, he would have 12 goals as opposed to 15. So 12 goals in 30 games would mean he's on pace for about 33 as opposed to 40. So yeah, I mean, I see Mikko Rantanen being about a 7-goal fewer player than he has shown he is, or that he's on pace for over a full season. TJ Oshie in that 2016-2017 season, shooting 23%, scored 33 goals. Yeah, I think that's probably about 8 more than I would expect from him if he were to shoot, 14, 15%. So he's on pace his 3-year average is around 17%. So I guess so. I'll agree with it if we're just saying specifically 2 guys who scored about 8 to 10 goals more than you would expect. But I don't know that I see it as the 1-to-1. Like if you told me, in pitching this show, I'm going to do a segment where TJ Oshie has the same value as Mikko Rantanen this year, I would have said, we need a new short shifts guy because I'm out of here. So I don't see it in that way, but definitely someone who's clearly outperforming their expected goals.
Yeah. Exactly. That's sort of the approach I'm taking. So not in all aspects. Obviously, you would want, if someone came and said, oh, I think TJ and Mikko are essentially equal, let's trade, you would obviously take that Mikko side. But in this particular aspect. So maybe this take will inspire something from you. I think we've actually gone back and forth on this one a little bit, so I have a feeling that you've got something to say here. Take 2. Tristan Jarry is this year's Jordan Binnington, who was the 2017-18 Matt Murray, to whom Tristan Jarry is currently Binningtoning. Is that circular enough for you? Jarry, I'm talking about we've got a backup for a good team, seizing control of the job when the starter is underperforming, and becoming a waiver wire fantasy gem.
It's an interesting one. Yeah. There are 2 key differences, I think, between the 2 seasons. The one is just the timing, right? Like Jordan Binnington came out of nowhere from the AHL in the middle of the season, I think in January, and just suddenly put together this run. Whereas Tristan Jarry has kind of been up and down in Pittsburgh. He's played some games before, not exactly an unknown the same way that Binnington was. And also made his ascent to the number 1 job much earlier in the season than Jordan Binnington did. But overall, I think that that's a fair take. I think that that's a pretty lukewarm take, but not because it's incorrect, because it is very correct. It's not a hot take whatsoever. I think that Tristan Jarry, absolutely, when we're looking back on this season, he, much like Jordan Binnington, will be ranked very highly coming into the following season after that breakout, despite having been nowhere near anyone's radar. I remember when, what was his name? DeSmith? Was it DeSmith who got sent down? Or did Jarry get sent down this year?
Jarry was the one who was down. So at the start of the year, it was DeSmith and Murray, which I think is why a lot of people felt like Jarry was a little bit more coming out of nowhere since he took over this job instead of DeSmith. But yeah, so I think in that way, maybe it has a few more similarities. But I see your point. Certainly it is much less of a who dat out of nowhere the way that Binnington certainly was. And they have not reached the heights that Binnington did last year, obviously.
Not quite, but it's not like you'd be surprised to see this Pittsburgh Penguins team make a run with Jarry as the starter.
Yeah, so he's obviously been very nice, although, it's worth pointing out that he has let in 3 goals in his last several games. I think today there might have been, the Penguins leapt out to such a big lead that there might have been some score effect elements in play here. They may have been laying back a little bit, at least on the defensive side of things. But yeah, 3 goals allowed in the last several games. Not looking great, but continuing to rack up the wins. Obviously, that's what you want to see. If he keeps winning, it's going to make it difficult for Murray to reclaim his spot. And having Crosby back, obviously, is going to be, if it can improve their win-loss, their points percentage any more than it already has been in his absence, that's going to be helpful for Jarry as well.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned the 3 goals against in the last couple of games, still leading the league in save percentage. So it's still a little early or I guess he's second to Anton Khudobin. Among starters, still the number 1, the only starter above 930. He's sitting with a 930. I'll give him an above 930 for that.
Definitely been a very quality waiver wire ad. All right, so maybe not a ton of movement on that one. I think I've got a take that is going to elicit some response from you here. My third and final rate my take is the Nashville Predators are this year's St. Louis Blues.
All right, convince me.
Here's my defense of this take. Now, I'm not sure I'm all the way there myself, but for the sake of our thought experiment, I'm going to go all the way here. So I looked at the numbers of the Predators at the time of their coaching change. I looked at the Blues last year at the time that Mike Yeo was fired. And just for fun, I took a look at the 15-16 Penguins as well when Mike Sullivan took over. And obviously that turned the Pens season around and led them to a cup as well. So looking at these teams, here are some things that I noticed. At the time of the coaching change, both the Penguins and the Predators had managed a greater than, half of the available points percentage. So the Penguins were 15, 10, and 3. The Predators at the time of Laviolette's firing were 19, 15, and 7. So not terrible numbers, but underperforming kind of where they expected to be. Of course, the Blues were down, doing very poorly, 7, 9, and 3 with a .447 points percentage. Taking a look at the Corsi for percentage, looking at how they were able to control play. By the end of the season, that Blues team was up to 51.7. The Preds right now are at 52.58, so outpacing that other side. All 3 teams had relatively similar Corsi for percentages. The Preds right now in their season and the Pens and the Blues at the end of the season after their big turnarounds. So I think that's a feather in the Preds cap that they already are, of the 3 teams, they have the best Corsi for percentage at this point in the season. They are shooting better than either the Pens or the Blues teams at the Pens and Blues by the end of the year and the Preds at this point in the season. They are winning their goals for and expected goals for percentage. And in fact, the Preds are a little bit behind their expectations, so there might be some positive regression in that regard. They are, however, scoring more goals than expected. They have 149 goals on the season, when expected goals for has them around 123.5. And they're also being scored on more than you would expect, as is probably not a major surprise to anyone who has been following the goaltending woes of the Nashville Predators. They've allowed 142 goals when the expectation is closer to 110. So you can see why that expected goals for percentage is the actual goals for percentage is lagging a little bit behind. And you can see here, too, the even strength save percentage is a big part of it. The Blues, by the end of the season of their reclamation project, were up to 913 at even strength. Preds right now are sitting at 908, and that's after significant improvements over the last few games. When I originally prepared this table a couple games ago, it was down at 889 at even strength. That's pretty nasty. So conclusions here, the Preds are already a pretty good team, and while they're probably due for a little bit of negative offensive regression according to their expected goals numbers, they're also allowing more than the expected goals against, so those may serve to sort of cancel each other out and just result in a little bit lower scoring games on both ends of the ice. We talked last week about John Hynes maybe making some incremental improvements on both ends, maybe significantly on the offensive end, just because it seems like he's giving up less offense in order to be successful on defense. end of the line here, I think the Preds are a better candidate than the Sharks or the Stars to pull a St. Louis from last year, make a coaching change after some early struggles, and make it to win the Stanley Cup.
The Preds are definitely performing. So, I mean, they fit the profile a lot better than the Sharks or the Stars. I mean, the Sharks are bad, but I wouldn't argue that they're underperforming, whereas the Stars were pretty solid under Jim Montgomery. They were getting good results, and they were doing pretty well in the standings after a bit of a slow start. So, yeah, I think that they definitely fit the team profile, especially the part of the struggling goaltender in Jake Allen that the Blues were subjected to for the first few months of the 2019 season. The question is, do they have a Jordan Binnington on the team? And I'm not really sure that we should expect to see a goalie go on a run like Jordan Binnington did every single year. I do think Juuse Saros is in an interesting position here. No reason why he shouldn't steal a number of the starts moving forward. And I mean, Pekka Rinne has obviously had a late career surge over the past couple of years ahead of this one. But as of right now, we're looking at 2 goalies below 900 save percentage, and it's tough to think that either one of them is going to be a Jordan Binnington. Like, you're not going to believe in a Jordan Binnington until the season's over, right? And then you're like, oh snap, that was it. It's difficult to see that coming. I mean, in this case, I can see the thought process. I can see the numbers equaling in the first part. It's just the question of whether or not they'll get the performance that they need in the second part to elevate them into that position. So I do like Juuse Saros. I've believed in him before. I'm not sure that he can be that guy, but if he is, then my hat is off to you, Lewis. Are you going to place a future Stanley Cup bet on the Nashville Predators?
Well, I'm not much of a betting guy. But it would certainly be fascinating to see this happen. I really want to watch the Preds over the next couple of weeks. One thing that we frequently see from coaching changes is that some of the biggest beneficiaries are the goalies. So I think that if we can, I spent a lot of the start of the year railing about how if LA could get some decent goaltending, they would be winning a lot more games. I feel similarly about Nashville, but I also feel like the overall talent level there is much stronger. So while no, I don't plan on going out to actually place a bet, I think that now would be an interesting time to make such a bet on the Preds when expectations are kind of low, but a potential turnaround is in the future. Certainly not advising anyone to go out and do such a thing. I don't want to be responsible for your win or your loss, but something I'm going to be keeping my eye on as the season progresses, and I'm hoping for all the best for the Preds. I don't own a ton of them, but I think that when they are good, the league is better for it. Obviously, it's a great atmosphere down there in Nashville, and great to see them be successful. So all the best to them and John Hines.
So, Lewis, this segment is called Rate My Take. I am going to give you some ratings on these takes, starting with TJ Oshie of 17 is Mikko Rantanen of this year. I'll give you the goals portion, but the goals portion to me on a fantasy show, that's only 1/3 or, 1/4 of the picture. So I got to give that one about a 3 out of 10 for Oshie is Rantanen. When it comes to Tristan, Jarry is Jordan Binnington is Matt Murray, that one is pretty defensible. It's not super hot. I think that we've already pretty much seen it, and especially, having that AHL connection where they both started the year down in the A, that's pretty solid. I can give that one a 8. And then when we move into a Nashville is the St. Louis of this year, when I'm thinking about that one, the numbers are all there. The before picture is identical, right? We're looking at 2 kind of schlubby fellas looking in the mirror, hoping for something better, hoping for someone to change, some miracle product to change their lives. What is the likelihood that they get that miracle product, though? I think it's pretty low, but the numbers are so good, so I am going to give you a 7 on that one.
Oh, all right. I'll be happy to take that one to the back. I think that's going to be a great one for us to sort of follow as the year goes on, and we'll try and remember to update periodically when we get something there.
Awesome. Well, Lewis, we are out of time for another episode of Short Shifts. My name is Ben Burnett. I'm signing out of here. Lewis, take us home.
All right, well, when we see you next Thursday, keep an eye out for the return of the Patron 5. If you are interested in participating in our Patron Facebook group, head to keepingkarlsson.com/patron to join up. You get access to Patron casts, one of which will be dropping live tomorrow night and coming out on the Keeping Karlsson Patron feed on Thursday morning. So that's always something fun to look out for. Bryan and Elon answer every single question. They have never missed one. It's an incredible streak. Additionally, you'll be part of our Facebook group and you can vote on the Patron 5. Please give us a follow at AVG Time on Ice and at Keeping Karlsson. And until we see you again, play smart and keep your shifts short.